Welcome everyone to a new build 31, which we've decided to call Quicksilver. This is going to be a quick one. I've compressed it all into the one video because this was a rebuild and upgrade, and because we've done a few of these lately, I didn't want to go back and show the original build and the whole process of, stripping everything down, cleaning everything up, even though a rebuild and upgrade is actually often more work than building a new system from scratch, because you have to strip down the old build, restore all of the components, and there are always issues. And I thought I'd just mention statistically the problems that we run into the most, which is good information for beginners to take note of. Specifically water block installations, at least half of the time, which is pretty bad, we come across this particular problem. People don't get caught out on the obvious problems, such as the placement of thermal interface material. They get caught out on the screw length. So they use the wrong screws in the wrong places. They mix up the screws. And what it means is that sometimes a screw is too long, and so it tightens up, but it's not actually tightening, it's just getting to the end of the thread, which means that the water block is not tied up against the PCB, which is a very serious problem. If you have a gap, obviously it's going to lead to serious overheating problems. Also, people still like to use distilled water, and so that leads to serious corrosion, and that is something that we saw with these components, and we had to spend a lot of time cleaning them up. They didn't end up looking too bad. If they look really bad, we'll often definitely recommend replacement, but we're going to be using a good high quality coolant now, which will halt the corrosion completely. So there's no need to worry about that. As long as you clean everything up, you can still use the components, as long as you're not worried about the aesthetics, or if the aesthetics look okay. As long as from that point onwards you use a good high quality coolant and change it fairly frequently, at least once a year. Although Mayhem's X1 and Pastel can last many years from my experience. Also, the overuse of thermal paste is a big one, and the use of conductive thermal paste like liquid metal. We see it used everywhere, CPU, GPUs, and we've actually seen it so bad where it's dripping all over the components, all over the PCBs, causing shorts, and it's really difficult to clean up, mainly off a PCB. And it can actually break down other metals, such as the copper, so it's a very serious issue. So coming from the 900D, it was interesting because the components in the 900D looked really cramped. But coming into this case, even though it's not a whole lot bigger, it's a bit taller, but you can see how sparse the components are, and that's just due to the amazing Caselabs design. You can just fit anything into these cases. It's certainly a massive case, and kind of a case of the past. The SMA8 became a lot more popular because it's a fair bit smaller, yet still fits all of the high-end components you can imagine. But what I do really like about this case, even though I would never use it for a personal build because it's just too big, is the fact that the cooling compartments are completely separate from the main compartment. So there's no hot air from the radiators going into the main compartment. I've only built into this case a few times, and this time I really wanted to do some through panel mods. So you'll notice that half of the loop is actually around the back of the build, out of sight. Now, a lot of people are going to say, why not dual loops? Well, you have to understand we are building systems for customers, and I can't get carried away with every build, or really get carried away at all, unless the customer gives me permission to do so. Otherwise, I'm just going to become too overbearing and, push in the direction I want to go. But it's interesting because people kind of, when there's something not there that could be done, are always asking, why didn't we do that? But then when everything is covered and it's an extremely high-end system, people are like, oh my God, you've just gone way overboard. So either way, but who knows, the customer will probably upgrade in a few years' time and we can add dual loops then. But, due to how sparse the components are in this case, I decided to stick with that very clean look, and that was a major reason for all of the through panel mods. Now, the custom paint job on this case is a black base coat with a silver pearl. The whole clear coat is also cut flat and polished. So as always, 16mm tube, Bitspower 16mm black sparkle, and hardline compression fittings. A lot of through panel fittings here each time I go through a panel in the case. Now, a lot of people ask me, and I realize I haven't actually answered this question for a few years now, like 2 or 3 years, and I've probably answered it like once. Why do I always use 16mm tube? Do I always use 16mm tube? Well, the answer is, these days, yes, I always use it. The only situation I won't use it is in an extremely tight build where it doesn't fit. You know, sometimes with RTX, you just can't fit 16mm tube. Anyway, what really cleaned up this loop is the fact that it's just a single loop, but most importantly, this pump and res combo being so long, 350mm reservoir on it. So we drop straight down through the lower mid plate from the pump with a 90-degree single rotary fitting. You're not going to be able to see very well back here, but we drop straight into a Q fitting, mini valve on a mini D plug for the drainage system. Now that is at the lowest point that's accessible. The actual lowest point is behind the power supply, which would have required substantial modifications. There is another port up there on the radiator, which is higher than the current drainage port, so that was useless to me. So coming across, we have a 20mm extension, a 90-degree dual rotary, then another 90-degree dual rotary going into the 560mm radiator, another one coming out, a medium telescopic fitting, another 90-degree dual, and then a 15mm extension going back up through the lower midplate, a 90-degree single and a 90-degree dual, which gets us directly underneath the GPUs. That had to be done because there's a fans and a radiator here in the way, so I couldn't come straight up. Then we have a parallel configuration between the GPUs as always. We have two 90-degree singles going into the CPU and a 90-degree dual coming out. And then straight up and into the top compartment. And again, we come around the back. Then we have a 10mm extension, 90-degree dual, another 90-degree dual going into a 25mm extension, another 25mm extension, 90-degree single, and then straight back into the top of the reservoir, which works out really nicely because we can access it for filling, and it just really cleans things up. There's a whole lot less connections because of it.